What's up, guys? Coach Nate, and I wanted to explain today the difference between training movements and training muscles. This is a topic that is extremely helpful when approaching your training, okay? So first, we're going to talk about training movements and then training muscles, and then we're going to talk about when you would do each one. So first is going to be training movement. So when I'm saying you're training a movement, basically, this is when you're doing an exercise and your focus is on, of course, good form, but after that you're just trying to do as much weight as possible. So you're going for performance. Training the movement is all about training for performance. It's all about being able to do as much work as possible. So typically this is in the form of weight. So assuming you have good form, how can you lift the maximal load possible for whatever, the given amount of reps you're trying to get. So for example, if you're doing sets of 5, if you're training the movement, then you are trying to get, do as much weight for 5 reps as possible, okay? So then we're gonna talk about training muscles. Training muscles is, rather than trying to lift as much weight as possible, it's about trying to get the maximum stimulation of that muscle, to feel that muscle working as much as possible. So this has to involve some type of at least moderate loading, but in contrast to training movements where you are trying to lift the most weight possible, you typically want to select a slightly lighter load than what you could do when it comes to training muscles. So let's talk about when you would use each style of training. So in terms of when we train movements primarily on our main lifts and when we're training them for strength. And so your main lifts are going to be those big heavy barbell movements we do: the squat, the deadlift, the bench press, the press, right? The barbell shoulder press. These are going to be your main lifts, and typically, not all the time, but typically when you're doing those, especially for lower reps, somewhere in the 3 to 8, maybe 10, up to 10 reps rep range, you are training the movement. You're not thinking about, when doing the bench press, let me squeeze my pecs. You're thinking about big breath, control it down and explode up. You're thinking about maximum performance. When you're doing the deadlift, you're not thinking, let me really feel it in my glutes on the way up. You're just trying to get a big breath, stay tight, and rip the weight off the ground and get it to lockout. Same thing for the shoulder press. You're just trying to explode up overhead. For the squat, you're trying to control it down and explode up, but you're very focused on performance. You want to use good form, but with that good form, you want to, explode up, put as much force into the bar as possible so you can do as much weight as possible, okay? This is going to give you a very strength-focused approach. Now, it's by getting stronger on those main lifts, it's going to do wonders for your physique, for looking, feeling, and performing the way that you want. But the primary focus on those main movements is typically training the movement. In contrast, most of the other lifts that you will do, unless we specify otherwise in the program, most of the other lifts that you do, you're going to be training muscles, not movements. So for example, on a dumbbell bench press, let's say I can use, 75-pound dumbbells for sets of 10, but today I'm actually going to grab the 55s or the 60s because I can really control those down, get a big stretch, squeeze my pecs at the top, control it down, press and squeeze. So even though I'm capable of lifting 75s or whatever, I can actually get a better stimulus in the muscle with a lighter load. Now, obviously, if I dropped way down, if I dropped a lot lower, if I went from 75s to 5s, 5s aren't going to do anything for me. So the load still has to be moderate, but that's the key. Typically, when you're training muscles, you're choosing a lighter, maybe on the lighter end of moderate, somewhere in the moderate load, okay? And then you're trying to make that weight feel hard, right? By controlling it down, press up and squeeze, controlling it down, press up and squeeze. In contrast to training movements where you're trying to make a heavy load feel as light as possible. Now, a heavy load is not going to feel light, but the goal is to move it quickly, explosively, as if it is light, okay? Now, this is primarily a muscle building focus. However, you're still going to be building strength by training muscles. So there's pros and cons to each. You don't always want to train one or the other, but taking the appropriate approach with each lift is very important. So we're gonna tie it all back to the program we're doing now. The main lift of the day, if I remember correctly, we're starting with a bench press one day, a squat one day, an RDL one day, and a deadlift one day, okay? We are training movements. We are training the movement. We are trying to get you stronger on those. I think we're in the 8 to 10 rep range on those. And so you're really focused on performance on those, using good form, but then lifting as much load as possible for the appropriate sets and reps and RPE that are prescribed. But you're training the movement. For all the other movements, okay, for all the other movements in the program that we're doing, we are training the muscle. We're not training the movement, we're training the muscle. And so when you're doing your Bulgarian split squats, when you're doing your heel elevated squats, when you're doing your skull crushers, your curls, okay, all those things, when you're doing them, focus on controlling it down and then squeezing on the way up, controlling it down, squeezing on the way up, getting that contraction. And so we want to try to make the lighter weights feel heavy. And you guys will know what I'm talking about. The difference in terms of how this feels. When you're training a movement, you might get fatigued in the muscle, but you're not gonna necessarily feel a lot of burning, like a burning sensation or like an overly fatigued sensation. You might be a little fatigued, but generally the thing that's limiting you from getting more reps is just mechanical tension. Like you can't exert any more force against the load. You just literally can't move the bar anymore, okay? However, when you're training muscles, like the thing that's fatiguing you is all the burning, the fatigue, the pump, the soreness that you're feeling as you're doing the sets, okay? So there's pros and cons to both, and we will tell you one way or another whether you want to be focusing on training a movement or training the muscle. But as a general rule of thumb, on your main lifts, your heavy barbell lifts, your squat, bench, deadlift, and your press, you train those as movements, and then you're training all the other movements, even if they're a variation. For example, like the heel elevated squat, it's done with the barbell, but it's got a 3-1-0 tempo. It's the tempo squat. Like, you definitely want to go light on these and then make that lightweight feel hard. So on those, all the other movements that you're going to be doing, you're going to be training the muscles. So I hope this helps. On the main lifts, try to lift as much weight as possible with good form. On everything else, try to make a light to moderate weight feel very hard and really focus on the muscle that you are targeting.